Norma Jean Mortensen, who would later be known to the world as Marilyn Monroe, was born in Los Angeles in 1926. Her arrival into the world was not accompanied by stability, wealth, or security. Instead, she entered a life already fractured by absence and uncertainty. Her father was not present in her upbringing, and her mother, Gladys, struggled with profound mental health issues that would shape the course of Norma Jean's earliest years. These circumstances cast long shadows over her childhood, creating an environment where love and stability were often replaced by fear and transience. From the very beginning, Norma Jean experienced the kind of instability that most children are shielded from. Her mother's condition frequently left her incapable of providing consistent care, and as a result, the little girl was placed in foster homes and orphanages. These frequent relocations meant that she rarely had the chance to build lasting bonds or feel rooted in one place. Each move deepened her sense of displacement, leaving her with the constant impression that she did not truly belong anywhere. This rootlessness became a defining feature of her early years, embedding within her a longing for permanence that would follow her for the rest of her life. Her time in foster care exposed her to an atmosphere that was often cold and indifferent. Caregivers could be stern, preoccupied, or simply overwhelmed by the number of children under their supervision. Norma Jean quickly learned to adapt by keeping her emotions hidden and presenting a cheerful face, even when she felt abandoned or overlooked. The smile that the world would later know so well began as a survival mechanism, a shield that allowed her to mask pain and disappointment. Despite the difficulties, there were moments when she found solace in small joys. Trips to the movie theater became one of her few escapes from a reality marked by instability. Watching glamorous actresses on screen, she was transported to worlds filled with elegance, beauty, and certainty, worlds that contrasted starkly with her own experiences. The silver screen became more than entertainment for her. It was a refuge and a guide, shaping her earliest ideas of what life could be if she were able to break free from the limitations that surrounded her. The women she saw in films became role models, embodying strength, charm, and desirability. They seemed to possess the love and admiration that Norma Jean so deeply craved. In the midst of her unstable childhood, Norma Jean's imagination became one of her greatest sources of comfort. She created fantasies in which she was no longer the overlooked foster child, but someone cherished, admired, and celebrated. These inner worlds gave her a sense of purpose, allowing her to envision a future far removed from her present circumstances. Yet even as she dreamed of better days, she remained acutely aware of her reality. The contrast between her fantasies and her everyday struggles only deepened her determination to escape the shadows of her upbringing. Her experiences in early childhood were marked by a duality, vulnerability, and resilience. She endured feelings of rejection, the absence of parental love, and the unpredictability of her environment. But at the same time, she developed an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. She learned to hide pain beneath charm, to replace fear with hope, and to search for meaning even in the bleakest situations. The hardships did not break her. Instead, they shaped her into someone who would later channel her suffering into an irresistible presence on screen. The constant uncertainty also instilled in her a deep longing for love and acceptance. Every foster placement reinforced the idea that she was temporary in the lives of others, and this left an imprint that would influence her relationships in adulthood. Her early need for affection, never fully satisfied, became an emotional undercurrent in her later life, driving both her ambition and her vulnerability. It was this paradox, strength forged in suffering, yet accompanied by an unquenchable hunger for love, that made her story so compelling. Norma Jean's childhood was also colored by moments of silence and observation. She often watched others closely, studying gestures, facial expressions, and tones of voice. In an environment where trust could not be taken for granted, she became skilled at reading people. This attentiveness later translated into her ability to project emotion with authenticity on screen, making her performances resonate deeply with audiences.
What had once been a defense mechanism in her childhood evolved into one of her greatest artistic tools. Even in the face of deprivation, she carried within her a natural brightness that those around her could not ignore. Teachers, neighbors, and acquaintances occasionally remarked on her beauty and charisma, qualities that seemed to shine even when she tried to blend into the background. These fleeting acknowledgments gave her a glimpse of the possibility that she might one day be seen not as a burden or a passing responsibility, but as someone special. That possibility lingered in her mind, quietly shaping her path forward. By the end of her childhood years, Norma Jean had already endured more than many adults. She had experienced instability, rejection, and the constant fear of being forgotten. Yet out of those shadows emerged a young woman who had cultivated resilience, imagination, and an unyielding will to seek a different life. Her hardships became the soil in which her dreams took root, dreams that would one day transform her into an icon. The contrast between her beginnings and her destiny would make her story unforgettable, but in those early years, all she had was a fragile hope, a borrowed smile, and the determination to survive.
As Norma Jean entered her teenage years, the turbulence of her childhood gradually gave way to the responsibilities of early adulthood. The world around her was also changing, shaped by the enormous upheaval of World War II. Factories that once operated at a steady pace were now running day and night to support the war effort, and countless women entered the workforce to replace the men who had gone overseas. Norma Jean, still searching for a sense of belonging and stability, joined this new army of workers. She found herself employed in a defense plant where she performed routine but necessary tasks, her days filled with the hum of machinery and the weight of duty. The factory environment was far from glamorous, yet it became the unlikely backdrop for a turning point in her life. While she worked diligently at her station, her striking appearance and natural charm caught the attention of a visiting photographer, assigned to document the women supporting the war effort on the home front. The camera, which she had always admired from a distance in darkened movie theaters, now turned toward her. For the first time, she was invited to step into the frame, not as a spectator, but as the subject. The photographs taken of her in that setting revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the uniform and the modest circumstances, she possessed a magnetism that the lens seemed to capture effortlessly. The images carried an unspoken promise, suggesting that the young woman could be more than just another face in the factory crowd. What began as a chance encounter slowly evolved into the foundation of a new path, one that offered her a glimpse of a future she had only dared to imagine in childhood. Encouraged by the response to those first photographs, Norma Jean began to explore opportunities as a model. She posed for pinup-style images that quickly found their way into magazines and calendars, where her fresh yet alluring look resonated with a wide audience. These early appearances were modest in scale, but they carried with them the excitement of recognition. Each photograph that reached the public eye chipped away at the anonymity she had once endured. She was no longer invisible, she was beginning to be seen. As her modeling career developed, Norma Jean understood the power of transformation. She studied the women who graced the pages of magazines and film reels, noticing how appearance could be shaped and identity could be constructed. With careful intention, she began to craft her own image. The decision to lighten her naturally brown hair to a radiant blonde marked a symbolic turning point. The golden hue gave her a brightness that stood out under studio lights and aligned her with the glamorous archetypes admired in Hollywood. This new appearance, combined with her natural charisma, allowed her to step closer to the world she longed to enter. The creation of her stage name further separated her from the uncertain identity of her past. She adopted the name Marilyn Monroe, a combination that evoked both elegance and memorability. Marilyn carried with it a softness and a glamour that fit the vision of a screen siren, while Monroe tied her to her maternal lineage, grounding her in a sense of continuity. Together, the name carried a rhythm and charm that suggested destiny, as though she had always been meant for the spotlight.
By embracing this new identity, she shed some of the shadows of Norma Jean's painful childhood and stepped into the light of possibility.
Her first roles in film were small, often little more than brief appearances designed to decorate the background of a scene. She played secretaries, receptionists, or nameless young women whose presence was more visual than narrative. Yet even in these fleeting moments, audiences noticed her. There was something in her expression, an unusual combination of innocence and sensuality, that made her stand apart. She was not simply another attractive extra. She carried within her an ability to draw the gaze, to command attention in ways that were difficult to define but impossible to ignore. Recognizing that beauty alone would not secure her a lasting place in Hollywood, Marilyn committed herself to studying the craft of acting. She attended classes, studied the performances of admired stars, and worked diligently to understand the nuances of expression, movement, and voice. She was determined to prove that she was more than a pretty face, that she could bring depth and authenticity to a role. Her teachers noted her intensity and eagerness to learn, qualities that set her apart from others who relied solely on their appearance. This period of her life was one of both opportunity and struggle. While her growing recognition brought excitement, she also faced the challenges of an industry that valued women more for their looks than their talent. She encountered skepticism, typecasting, and the constant pressure to conform to narrow ideals of femininity. Yet she persisted, driven by the memory of her earlier years when she had felt unseen and forgotten. Each step she took toward recognition was also a step away from the loneliness of her past. The early years of her career were marked by an undeniable hunger to succeed. Marilyn threw herself into every opportunity, no matter how small, with the hope that it might lead to something greater. She understood the importance of visibility in Hollywood, where even a few seconds on screen could open the door to a larger role. Her blend of vulnerability and allure gradually created a sense of intrigue around her, making audiences and industry insiders wonder what she might achieve if given the chance. By the close of this stage in her journey, Marilyn Monroe had moved far beyond the girl who once labored in a factory. She had reinvented herself with deliberate choices in appearance, name, and ambition. Though her path was still uncertain and filled with obstacles, she had taken the crucial first steps toward fame. She was no longer Norma Jean, the foster child lost in the shadows. She was Marilyn Monroe, a rising figure whose presence hinted at greatness. Her transformation had begun, and with it, the story of one of the most iconic women in history was set into motion. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe had crossed the fragile threshold between anonymity and stardom. What had begun as small appearances on screen had blossomed into prominent roles, and soon her name was associated with some of the most popular films of the decade. Hollywood, always eager to create icons, had found in her the embodiment of a new archetype. She was not merely another actress competing for attention, she was becoming a symbol of an era, representing the mingling of innocence and sensuality in a way that captivated audiences. Her early major roles quickly attracted wide attention. Audiences flocked to theaters not just for the films, but to see her. Each performance seemed to add to the allure, and critics, though often divided in their assessments, could not deny her presence on screen. She carried with her a charisma that transcended the limitations of the scripts she was often given. Even in light comedies or musicals designed more to entertain than to challenge, she radiated a natural magnetism that made her the focus of every scene. Her image began to shape itself into a powerful cultural force. Posters featuring her figure and smile were hung on walls in homes, dormitories, and military barracks. She became one of the most photographed women of the decade, her likeness appearing in magazines around the world. The public responded not just to her beauty, but to the sense of vulnerability and warmth that seemed to lie beneath it. Unlike some other stars whose appeal was based solely on glamour or distance, Marilyn seemed approachable, a blend of fantasy and reality that invited both admiration and affection. Fashion and style, too, began to bend around her influence. Women imitated her hairstyles, her makeup choices, and her clothing. Her blonde hair, luminous complexion, and distinctive red lips became defining traits that set trends beyond Hollywood. Marilyn's presence reached into every corner of popular culture, transforming her from an actress into a phenomenon. She was no longer merely a performer, she was a cultural icon, and her rise seemed unstoppable. Yet behind the glitter of this ascent lay challenges that would define her career and life. The studios, recognizing the commercial power of her name and image, sought to control her roles and her public persona. They favored placing her in parts that emphasized her sexuality and comedic timing rather than her potential for depth and dramatic expression. While these films brought enormous box office success, they also created frustration for Marilyn, who longed to prove that she could carry complex roles. She enrolled in acting classes, worked with coaches, and studied performances from respected actors, determined to be taken seriously. The press, meanwhile, fed the public's endless appetite for stories about her. Journalists followed her every step, capturing photographs of her at premieres, at restaurants, and even in her private life. Her personal affairs became subjects of speculation, her relationships scrutinized, and her every word analyzed. Fame, while elevating her to heights she had never dreamed possible, also stripped away much of her privacy. She was adored by millions, but at times she felt isolated by the very attention that defined her career. The balance between her public persona and her private self became increasingly difficult to maintain. On screen, she played characters who radiated confidence, charm, and seduction, but off-screen, she wrestled with doubts and insecurities. The weight of expectation grew heavier with each success. She knew that audiences adored the Marilyn Monroe they saw on screen, but she longed for them to see Norma Jean, the woman beneath the facade, with her depth of feeling and her capacity for authentic expression.
Her versatility began to show through as she secured roles in a variety of genres. She appeared in comedies that highlighted her timing and effervescent charm, musicals that showcased her ability to captivate with song and movement, and dramas that hinted at the emotional layers she sought to explore. Each new role expanded her repertoire and broadened her audience, even as the studios continued to push her toward typecasting. Despite these tensions, her career trajectory continued its rapid climb. She became one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood, a guarantee of full theaters and international recognition. Her star power was undeniable, and her influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of film. She embodied a cultural moment, a shifting perception of femininity and desire in post-war America. At a time when the nation was redefining itself, she stood as a figure who both reflected and shaped the changing ideals of beauty, independence, and fame. The paradox of her rise was that it brought both triumph and burden. The applause of audiences reassured her of her place in the world, but the constant pressure to maintain her image weighed heavily. She was celebrated as the ultimate symbol of glamour, yet she yearned for the acknowledgement of her craft. She was both the adored star and the struggling artist, a duality that defined her journey. By the middle of the decade, Marilyn Monroe had fully claimed her place among the great stars of Hollywood. She was not just a performer in successful films, but a central figure in the cultural imagination of her time. Her ascent was meteoric, and the glow of her fame seemed to outshine all obstacles. Yet even as her light burned brighter than ever, the complexities beneath her glamorous exterior hinted at struggles that fame alone could not resolve. She was celebrated as the ultimate symbol of glamour, yet she yearned for the acknowledgement of her craft. She was both the adored star and the struggling artist, a duality that defined her journey. By the middle of the decade, Marilyn Monroe had fully claimed her place among the great stars of Hollywood. She was not just a performer in successful films, but a central figure in the cultural imagination of her time. Her ascent was meteoric, and the glow of her fame seemed to outshine all obstacles. Yet even as her light burned brighter than ever, the complexities beneath her glamorous exterior hinted at struggles that fame alone could not resolve.
Behind the dazzling lights of Hollywood and the unending adoration of audiences, Marilyn Monroe carried within her a profound longing for intimacy and stability. Fame had surrounded her with admirers, journalists, and colleagues, yet none of them could fill the void of personal connection she desperately sought. Her journey through love was marked by great hope, intense passion, and inevitable disappointment. As the pressures of her career and the fragility of her inner world repeatedly collided with the reality of her relationships. Her first highly publicized romance was with Joe DiMaggio, one of the most famous baseball players of the era. To the public, their union appeared as a perfect blend of two American icons, the greatest athlete of his generation and the most celebrated actress of the screen. Their wedding drew enormous attention, symbolizing the union of sports and cinema, of masculine strength and feminine allure. At first, the relationship gave Marilyn the security and admiration she craved. Joe admired her beauty and adored her, but he struggled to accept the demands of her career. The spotlight that followed her everywhere clashed with his desire for a more private, traditional life. He wanted a wife who would retreat from Hollywood, while she felt compelled to pursue her career at its peak. Tension grew between the desire for domestic peace and the unstoppable momentum of her rising stardom. The marriage became a battlefield of conflicting expectations. Joe's protective instincts turned into jealousy as he witnessed the adoration Marilyn inspired from audiences. Scenes of her performances, especially when her sensuality was magnified on screen or in publicity photographs, ignited his discomfort. Marilyn, however, felt misunderstood, as though her pursuit of artistic recognition was incompatible with his vision of stability. Though their bond contained genuine love and affection, it could not withstand the strain. Their separation was painful, and though Joe would continue to care for her deeply throughout her life, the dream of lasting happiness with him dissolved into disappointment. Later, Marilyn found new hope for fulfillment in her marriage to playwright Arthur Miller. Their relationship was born out of intellectual and emotional attraction. Marilyn admired his intellect, his eloquence, and his ability to craft profound stories about the human condition. For her, he represented not only a partner, but a guide into a world of literature, thought, and depth. She longed to be recognized not just for her beauty, but for her capacity to engage with ideas and creativity. In Miller, she thought she had found someone who saw beyond the image of the star. Their early years together held promise. Marilyn embraced the role of a devoted wife, eager to prove that she could belong in a world defined by words and ideas rather than glamour and publicity. She attended literary gatherings, read widely, and engaged in conversations that challenged her intellect. For a time, she believed that this marriage would provide the acceptance and grounding she had always sought. But the pressures of fame once again infiltrated the relationship. Hollywood continued to define her as a symbol rather than as a serious actress. And despite Miller's initial admiration, he too began to see the divide between the woman and the icon. Scripts and roles continued to emphasize her physical allure rather than her abilities, and she felt that even within her marriage, she could not escape the cage of her image. The deeper she tried to connect, the more alienated she felt. Miller, burdened by the scrutiny that came with being married to one of the most famous women in the world, began to retreat emotionally. Their bond, once full of admiration and passion, grew strained under the weight of unfulfilled expectations and quiet disillusionment. Marilyn's search for love was complicated by her own vulnerabilities. Her childhood scars, her fear of abandonment, and her fragile sense of self-worth often surfaced in her relationships. While she gave herself fully to those she loved, her insecurities created turbulence, fueling cycles of intensity and conflict. The more she longed for acceptance, the more she seemed to encounter distance or rejection. Fame amplified these struggles, turning private moments into public spectacles. Newspapers and magazines chronicled her marriages and separations with a voyeuristic fascination, reducing her pain to headlines and entertainment for millions.
The contrast between her public image and her private reality grew sharper. On screen, she was the embodiment of charm and desire, an untouchable goddess who seemed to live beyond ordinary human struggles. Off-screen, she was a woman wrestling with loneliness, yearning for reassurance, and trying to balance her dreams of being loved for who she truly was against the demands of a world that wanted her only as an icon. Each failed relationship deepened her sense of isolation, reinforcing the gap between the fantasy of Marilyn Monroe and the reality of Norma Jean. Love for Marilyn was both a salvation and a source of sorrow. Every union began with the hope that she would finally find the unconditional affection she had been denied in childhood, but each ended with disappointment, reminding her of the fragility of happiness. While the world admired her from a distance, up close she struggled to find someone who could see her beyond the glamour, someone who could withstand the pressures of her fame and embrace her vulnerabilities without judgment. Her story in love was not one of fairy tale endings, but of repeated lessons in heartbreak. She had the attention of millions, yet often felt profoundly alone. Beneath the dazzling smile that charmed audiences lay a woman burdened by fears and unmet desires, navigating a world where love seemed always just within reach, yet ultimately elusive. These disappointments did not dim her star, but they etched deeper lines into the portrait of a woman whose vulnerability would become as much a part of her legacy as her beauty and fame.
By the end of the 1950s, Marilyn Monroe stood at the pinnacle of her career. Her films drew vast audiences, her image was instantly recognizable around the globe, and her name had become synonymous with allure and charm. Yet behind the glowing curtain of success, she was fighting an invisible battle that grew more consuming with each passing year. The glamour that the world adored was only one side of her existence. The other was filled with anxiety, self-doubt, and an unrelenting search for meaning. Marilyn yearned to prove herself as more than a screen siren. She wanted to transcend the roles that typecast her as the eternal seductress, a figure defined by appearance rather than substance. Determined to refine her craft, she immersed herself in the study of acting. She turned to the teachings of Konstantin Stanislavski, seeking a method that would allow her to inhabit her characters with authenticity and emotional depth. Her move to New York and her association with the Actors Studio gave her both inspiration and challenge. Surrounded by actors who valued seriousness and dedication to art, she felt invigorated by the opportunity to be taken seriously as an artist rather than dismissed as a mere icon. Despite her determination, the Hollywood system resisted her transformation. Studios valued her as the glamorous figure who could guarantee box office success, not as the ambitious actress striving for complex roles. Producers and executives pressured her to repeat the formula that had made her famous, casting her in comedies and musical numbers that emphasized her beauty and sensuality. Audiences, too, seemed to expect the same persona they had always adored, and any attempt to step outside that frame was met with skepticism or misunderstanding. This conflict between her aspirations and the industry's demands weighed heavily on her, creating a widening gap between the woman she wanted to become and the image she was forced to maintain. As the tension between her inner desires and external expectations grew, her personal struggles deepened. Marilyn's health became increasingly fragile. Years of stress, combined with sleepless nights, left her dependent on medication. Pills that were prescribed for rest and relief from anxiety soon became a daily necessity, intertwining her pursuit of stability with a quiet but destructive reliance on substances. What began as a means of coping turned into a cycle that trapped her further in exhaustion and despair. Her body grew weary under the burden, and her mind often hovered between clarity and haze, making it difficult for her to find consistency in her work and her relationships. Public attention only heightened her vulnerability. Every appearance was scrutinized, every gesture dissected by reporters eager to find flaws in the image of perfection. Rumors of unreliability, emotional breakdowns, and instability followed her like shadows. The pressure to remain radiant while feeling fragile within was immense.
For Marilyn, stepping in front of a camera or walking onto a stage often meant concealing inner chaos beneath the polished exterior of stardom. The applause of the crowd could not silence the doubts that haunted her once she returned to solitude. Her struggle was not merely with the outside world, but with her own identity. The name Marilyn Monroe belonged to a global phenomenon, yet beneath it lived Norma Jean, a woman who longed for authenticity and acceptance. The divide between these two selves grew sharper with each passing year. Norma Jean sought meaning, love, and peace, while Marilyn Monroe was expected to be flawless, radiant, and endlessly captivating. Living as both, she felt torn, as though her true self was fading behind the projection of a fantasy she no longer fully controlled.
At the height of her fame, her unpredictability became more apparent. She missed filming schedules, arrived late to sets, or withdrew when overwhelmed. While some colleagues dismissed these incidents as unprofessionalism, they were, in reality, signs of her inner turmoil. Acting, once a source of passion and renewal, became another arena where she felt the weight of expectation pressing against her spirit. Each performance demanded more of her than she could give, not in talent, but in emotional endurance. Marilyn's struggle within was a battle without clear resolution. She had achieved everything she once dreamed of: wealth, fame, beauty, and recognition, yet it left her with a hollow sense of incompleteness. The more the world demanded Marilyn Monroe, the further Norma Jean slipped into obscurity, hidden behind the glamorous smile and perfect image. Success had given her a crown, but no peace, a spotlight, but no sanctuary. The late 1950s revealed the paradox of her existence. Adored by millions, she felt alone. Celebrated for her beauty, she feared being unseen for her soul. Praised for her success, she felt imprisoned by the very image that had brought her glory. Beneath the shimmering facade of the world's most famous star was a woman waging a quiet, relentless war with herself. It was a struggle that no award, no headline, and no admiration could ever resolve, for it was fought not on the screen, but in the fragile corners of her heart and mind.
In August of 1962, the world was shaken by the sudden news of Marilyn Monroe's death. At only 36 years old, her life ended in circumstances that immediately stirred speculation, sorrow, and controversy. Found alone in her Los Angeles home, she left behind unanswered questions that would haunt the public imagination for decades. Official reports pointed toward a probable overdose of barbiturates, but the ambiguity surrounding the details opened a door for endless theories, ranging from personal despair to conspiracies involving powerful figures. Her passing became more than the death of a celebrated actress. It turned into an emblem of the fragility that fame could not conceal. The news reverberated across the globe. Fans gathered outside her home holding candles and flowers, mourning a woman they had never met yet felt deeply connected to. Newspapers printed her photographs alongside headlines filled with shock and grief. In Hollywood, colleagues who had once worked with her expressed disbelief, struggling to reconcile the memory of her charm and energy with the silence that followed her departure. The industry that had elevated her to dazzling heights now faced the tragedy of having lost one of its most radiant stars far too soon. Her unfinished projects stood as silent reminders of possibilities that would never be realized. A film she had been working on remained incomplete, a testament to the sudden interruption of her journey. Scripts that she had hoped to explore were left untouched, and the ambitions she carried to be taken seriously as a profound actress, to prove that she was more than the image created for her, were left unfulfilled. Her death froze her image in time, preserving her forever as the luminous figure the world adored, while obscuring the struggles that had shaped her final years. Marilyn's departure highlighted the cost of celebrity. To some, she symbolized the dangerous weight of expectations, the relentless demand to remain flawless while battling private turmoil. To others, she became a reflection of vulnerability itself, a reminder that beneath fame and glamour there existed a human being with fears, desires, and limits. Her tragedy was not merely personal, it was emblematic of a culture that consumed its icons without fully recognizing their humanity. Despite the sorrow, her presence did not fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger. Her films continued to play in theaters and later on television, allowing new generations to encounter her voice, her movements, and her unique blend of innocence and allure. Posters with her image decorated countless walls, and photographs captured her timeless beauty in moments of both spontaneity and design. She became more than a star of her era. She was transformed into a cultural archetype, a figure who represented femininity, fragility, and the paradoxical relationship between desire and despair. Artists, writers, and filmmakers drew inspiration from her life and her image. Songs were written in her memory, novels and poems tried to capture the essence of her spirit, and visual artists reimagined her face in endless variations. She became both a muse and a mystery, simultaneously a real woman and a myth woven into the fabric of the 20th century. The boundaries between Norma Jean, the woman she once was, and Marilyn Monroe, the legend she became, dissolved into a single enduring symbol. Her legend was built on contrasts. She was remembered for her radiant smile, yet also for the loneliness hidden behind it. She was celebrated as an embodiment of glamour, yet mourned as a victim of isolation and relentless pressure. She embodied the dream of Hollywood, while revealing its darkest shadows. This duality, both enchanting and haunting, ensured that her name would never fade into obscurity. Her legend was built on contrasts. She was remembered for her radiant smile, yet also for the loneliness hidden behind it. She was celebrated as an embodiment of glamour, yet mourned as a victim of isolation and relentless pressure. She embodied the dream of Hollywood, while revealing its darkest shadows. This duality, both enchanting and haunting, ensured that her name would never fade into obscurity. Her legend was built on contrasts. She was remembered for her radiant smile, yet also for the loneliness hidden behind it. She was celebrated as an embodiment of glamour, yet mourned as a victim of isolation and relentless pressure. She embodied the dream of Hollywood while revealing its darkest shadows. This duality, both enchanting and haunting, ensured that her name would never fade into obscurity. As the years passed, Marilyn Monroe was no longer simply regarded as a tragic actress of the past. She emerged as a permanent fixture of global culture, an icon of femininity, beauty, and vulnerability. Her influence stretched far beyond cinema, shaping fashion, art, and even the way society discussed fame and identity. Her image appeared in advertisements, on magazine covers, in museums, and in endless reinterpretations, each version reflecting the world's continued fascination with her. Her death in 1962 closed a chapter but opened a legacy that expanded endlessly. Marilyn Monroe became not just a memory, but a myth, a figure both historical and eternal. She represented the dream of stardom, the allure of beauty, and the profound cost of both. In her, the world saw the brilliance of a star and the fragility of a human soul, intertwined in a story that resonated far beyond the circumstances of her life. Through the tragedy of her end, Marilyn achieved a kind of immortality. She lived on in reels of film, in photographs that never aged, and in the collective imagination of millions who continued to search for meaning in her life and her loss. She became more than a person. She became an idea, a legend that bridged the distance between fantasy and reality. Her story remained one of both inspiration and warning, a tale of dreams fulfilled and sacrifices made, ensuring that Marilyn Monroe would forever stand as a symbol of both tragedy and legend.